Well, hello and welcome to today's EcoCiv dialogue on global systems change. I'm Andrew Schwartz. I'm co-founder and vice president of the Institute for Ecological Civilization, executive director of the Center for Process Studies, and an assistant professor with Claremont School of Theology at Willamette University. I have the privilege of being today's moderator and am excited for what will be, no doubt, a glorious dialogue. So today's event is brought to you through collaboration of the Institute for Ecological Civilization and YES magazine. Today's panel of experts will be discussing effectively a paradigm shift in humanity's relationship with nature through a fundamental change in our legal systems, exploring something called the rights of nature. And we'll be exploring the rights of nature in relation to what we call a well-being society or an ecological civilization. So I want to give a special thanks to my colleague, Megan Anderson, who's actually the one responsible for bringing this amazing group of panelists together, and I'd like to ask her to take a few moments to introduce our illustrious panel. Megan?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. So we have three wonderful panelists here today. One of them is Mona Polacca. She's a Hopi Havasupai Tewas elder, a senior fellow for the Original Caretakers program at the Center for Earth Ethics, and the chair of the International Council of the 13 Indigenous Grandmothers. Mona is also a representative of the Indigenous World Forum on Water and Peace, a coalition of Indigenous leaders and organizations and others to wish to protect water for the future generations. This is a vision from the elders and has the support of 60 organizations globally at the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And she's also the president and CEO of the Turtle Island Project, a nonprofit program founded in 1986 by Western practitioners and Native American healers to blend the science of psychoneuroimmunology, mind, body, and spirit medicine, and Indigenous wisdom and practices. Mona also serves as a member of the World Council of Religions and Spiritual Leaders due to her international justice work. And then we also have Hermann Ott, and he's the managing director of an environmental charity called Client Earth in Germany, and holds a doctorate in international environmental law, and also teaches sustainable global governance at the University of Sustainable Development in Everswald. He has served as the director of the Wuppertal Institute's Climate Policy Division from 1998 and set it up and headed its Berlin office in 2004, where he also worked as a senior advisor for the global sustainability and welfare strategies. From 2009 to 2013, he was a member of the Bundestag, the German federal parliament in Berlin, and has served as the Green Speaker on climate policy. And in this capacity, he's also a member of the Parliamentary Study on the Commission on Growth, Prosperity, and the Quality of Life, and chaired its working group on the decoupling of resource use from economic prosperity. He has served on the board of Greenpeace Germany and is currently the executive committee of the German League for Nature, Animal, and Environmental Protection, a network of 87 environmental organizations in Germany. And finally, we have Joe Bowersox III. He's the Dempsey Endowed Chair of Environmental Politics and Law in the Department of Environmental Science at Willamette University up in Oregon. In the department, his teaching includes courses in environmental natural resources, policy, forest management, environmental ethics, and social systems/natural systems interaction. Joe's research and teaching focuses on the nexus of human communities and complex ecosystems, and his publications include work on federal forest policy, Western water ecosystems, and environmental values. He has also worked as a congressional fellow in the United States Senate on forestry and energy issues, and continues to consult on state federal forest policy. He was founding director of Willamette's Center for Sustainable Communities, and now the Center for Sustainability and Environmental Justice. So thank you, all three of you, for being here today. We look forward to the conversation.
And Melissa.
Who is kind of viewing and participating, but she doesn't have her video today. And Melissa is the co-director of The Invisible Hand. I'm sorry.
It's a beautiful thing to have an event on the rights of nature, and then Megan's birds in the background chirping away as she's trying to talk.
Yes, they're very excited and want to participate as well.
Yeah, you can't coordinate that.
But yes, Melissa is a writer, director, and documentary film producer and vocal artist from Potter County, Pennsylvania, the ancestral lands of the Susquehannock and the Haudenosaunee indigenous tribes. In 2011, she co-founded the investigative news nonprofit Public Herald, where she co-directed and produced 3 award-winning documentary films. All 3 were feature narration by award-winning actor and friend Mark Ruffalo, who is executive producer of the latest work, The Invisible Hand, which is about the rights of nature movement, which was released in September of 2019. Melissa was honored alongside of 5 other recipients of the Community Sentinel Award for Environmental Stewardship for fighting to protect their communities and nature. So we welcome Melissa as well, even though her video will not be on.
Fantastic. And Melissa, feel free to turn on your video as you need, or just chime in through audio. So our format today is really, it's intended to be dialogical and interactive. So all of those of you watching at home, which is a wonderful thing with online events, you can submit your questions for the panel, or even just reflections of your own using the comment features here on Zoom. And after the first 60 minutes of discussion with our panelists, we'll actually then go into breakout rooms for deeper discussion among all of those in attendance. So let's get started. And Mona, I'm hoping that you can get us started off, because as someone who works globally with Indigenous leaders on justice, peace, sustainability, I just want to know, what does the term rights of nature mean to you?
First of all, I'd just like to greet each and every one of you, and also to give thanks for this beautiful day and this time for us to come together and share our thoughts and our beliefs and life experiences here on Mother Earth. In that way, we are all related, as well as our relationship with what we call the foundations of life: the water, the air, the fire, the sun, Mother Earth. All these things are our life. We're dependent upon it, just like we are when we're conceived and in the womb of our mother, our birth mother, and how we're nourished and we're prepared to come into this world. And when we come into the world, we meet all of these things. The first thing that we meet when we come into this world is the water. We live in it for 3/4 of a year. It comes out before us, we follow it. The first thing we do when we enter into this world, we take a breath of air. That's the second foundation of life. The next thing that happens is there comes a time when there's a fire maybe in the home that heats the home so you're warm and cared for. When you walk out for the first time, you're brought outside, the sun for the first time sees you. And then there comes a time when you make a connection with Mother Earth and you start walking on her. You start eating the foods that she provides. And in that way, we are given a right to life through all those sacred connections with these foundations that are given to us. And we believe, don't we, that we have a right to life, to live here. Oh, even our governmental constitutions say that. We have a right to life, to live and pursue happiness in this world, in our homelands. And so here we are questioning, why does What is the right to nature? The right to nature, they are life. Nature is life. What is nature? I think, when we talk about nature, we're talking about, we say all of the divine creations, we consider it divine. That's what we consider the nature. That's what we consider Mother Earth. It's divine. It's not man-made. It has energy, power to it that sustains us physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally in our everyday life. Not only us, but all of the rest of we say, our relatives that are here in this world with us. And so all the species, everything, the plant life, the animal life, the water life, all of these things, the little creatures that we don't even see. And so that's what, from my perspective, being an Indigenous person, and what I've heard from others around the world, is that's what we consider rights of nature. We have to take care of it. That's our instruction. To take care of it, it takes care of us. Reciprocity, to give and to take, those kind of teachings, that's what rights of nature is, to me anyway, my teaching. Thank you.
Thank you. I love that. And I love the being able to start with the question, okay, well, what is nature? And if nature is life, then, perhaps the rights of nature are just the rights of life. And I think what we're going to be talking about further now throughout the rest of this interaction is what are the implications, right? But the other side of this is not just asking what is nature, but also what are rights. And Hermann, I think as our resident legal expert here on international environmental law, I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about your perspective on what is meant by the term rights in a legal context, and then what would be the implications of recognizing the quote unquote rights of nature?
Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for allowing me to join this discussion. It's a very interesting format. It's a little bit cozy, and I feel like being in your living room, Andrew and Megan. And let's have a chat about something which I find extremely important. I mean, I've come a long way from being an international lawyer and starting in a research institute, the Wuppertal Institute, being concentrating at that time on international law and how to get the rules right. And my conviction at that time was, if you get the rules right, then everything falls into place, and we will be able to find a good place for man on Earth. And but when I realized in the course of my professional career, and also privately, I must say, that I mean, climate change is not the most important subject. It is our relationship with the planet and with all the other beings on this planet. That's the most important. It's a mindset. And when I realized that, I started thinking about what can the law contribute to changing our mindset. Our law is part of what we think and how we construct the world, of course. It's influenced by social developments. It's influenced by traditions, of course, as we see in the various jurisdictions on our planet. But on the other hand, also the law has an impact on what people think and how they perceive the world. A very simple example, when you see pictures from the River Rhine in the 1950s, you see that there's cars parking on the shores, and there's all these people busy cleaning their cars. And this was normal at that time. At some point, this was prohibited. And this changed the people's mindset about what is being possible and what is not, and what is appropriate and what is not. And since I think that we have to redefine the way we see the world and the way we perceive our position on this planet, and one of the roles, or one of the instruments that we can actually use, is to frame people's minds by coining new terms, by developing new institutions. And these institutions can be, they don't have to be like physical institutions, legal institutions. And the rights of nature, rights of animals, that is kind of a legal institution, which, if it is done, and already on the way of getting there, discussing the concept is changing people's minds, because we have to. We are simple creatures, really, and the way we think is that the way that our environment forms us and makes impressions upon us. And that's why it is extremely important to talk about things that are not yet there, but that we strive to come. And rights of nature, for me, allowing or giving a status to non-human beings and even to ecosystems, for me, is one way of transforming people's perceptions and people's minds. And of course, that's the first step. And in the second step, it will also profoundly, but that's maybe for later in the discussion, profoundly change the way we deal with our environment, with our planet, with other beings, because it kind of reverses the burden of proof. But that's for later. Thanks.
We can come back to that then. Don't let us forget. But as a philosopher and religion scholar myself, I'm really drawn to this idea of changing our perception about what the natural world is, how humans are related to it. And I think this shift, I think part of this paradigm shift we're talking about, it's not just a legal shift, but a shift in our perception, as you said. So it's instead of seeing the world as a dead collection of objects that have no rights, we see the world as living, right, and vibrant, and then therefore deserving of these rights. And so I think even that shift in orientation is going to come with a whole lot of implications. But when we talk about the rights of nature, it also seems like it's really complicated, right? It's kind of complex because it's not just a shift in thinking, but it's a shift in our systems. And it's tied to our existing systems, our legal systems, our political systems, our economic systems. And Melissa, in your fascinating documentary, The Invisible Hand, you frame the struggle of the rights of nature movement as a struggle between capitalism and democracy. And I'm wondering, what does capitalism and democracy have to do with the rights of nature?
Well, thank you, Andrew. That's an excellent question. And I really appreciated everything that Mona and Hermann had to say. So for me, and we really bring this into the film Invisible Hand, rights of nature is part innate experience and understanding, right? Some cultures have preserved this, others have lost it, right? But it's also, like Hermann was talking about, it's a very intellectual enterprise in the form of a legal strategy, right? Where we have to redefine the parameters of how we as a society, as a collective species, navigate the world and present and live out our values. So the reason, or the way that this, what this has to do with capitalism and democracy is very much rooted in power, right? So the reason that the movement exists is as an antithesis to this very fundamental struggle and this very dangerous reality that's built into our current legal system. And that reality is that corporations are king, right? They propose the boundaries, they make the decisions about where operations will and will not happen. To hell with the communities, the frontline people, the indigenous poor, people of color, who are more often than not the ones who are bearing the brunt of the impacts of those decisions. And so the rights of nature movement exists alongside a community rights movement. And that community rights movement is about shifting, is about preserving or even taking back democracy, right? It's about having the ability as a community to democratically make decisions that affect us, and actually having the authority to make those decisions and carry them out. That is not the status quo right now. And so in the film, we highlight the struggle of several communities, one of whom is Grant Township in Indiana County, Pennsylvania, what's known as Pennsylvania, right? And we follow that community from the onslaught of a threat, which is a radioactive toxic waste injection in their community, through the process of practicing that democratic ideal, which we're supposed to have in the United States, and watching them realize, oh, wait a second, this democracy thing is not actually true, not in a participatory way anyway. And the corporation really has all the power here. And that's why they chose to institute a home rule initiative, it's called here in Pennsylvania, to pass a local law democratically that gave rights to them as a community, as decision makers, and as giving them the right to say no and the right to decide what happens to them, but also granting legal rights for nature so that they, as part of that nature, right, that ecosystem, that they can bring nature's voice forward in the court of law as well.
And I expect that for many of us, this question of voice is really important. And what does it mean? I mean, you can talk about power and how power is so central to this conversation. I mean, but what does it mean to speak for the natural world that can't necessarily speak for itself, or can it? And maybe it just uses different words, quote unquote, right? I hope we can talk about that more, but I think this also connects with what I was thinking for you, Joe, is this question as a professor who specializes in this relationship between social and natural systems. I think it piggybacks on what Melissa was just saying. How do you see the rights of nature relating to both social and environmental well-being?
That's a really good question, and you would have to give that one to me, wouldn't you? But no.
I knew you were up for the task.
But first, I'd like to just kind of go back to a little bit about what Mona was saying, and particularly, I was just struck by the way that she started and thinking about relationships. That is the critical thing, right? It's the relationship, as she says, between us as human beings and the natural world, between us and our mother, if you want to put it in that phrase. And I'll just say that I'm first and foremost an ethicist. I'm not a lawyer or I'm not even a law professor. I just happen to teach law in an undergraduate institution, right? But to me, so as an ethicist, I see this first, right? And I guess one of the things I'm always curious about with regards to the language of rights is that I try to recognize, and I'm very wary that the concept of rights is all kind of tied up with images of property and exclusion, right? It's about keeping things separate, right? And I find it really interesting how in the 21st century, that what we have here in the term of rights is it's a remnant of a formerly more robust moral language, right? And we want to attribute rights to things that we love, that we care about, that we hold dear for all sorts of good reasons, right? Because we want them to suddenly be seen in a way that they haven't been seen, right? We want to attribute value to them that's non-instrumental value. We want them to stand out. As Melissa was saying, we want them not to just simply be commodified, right? Not to be only seen for their instrumental value. And So to me, the attribution of rights has this sort of moral import of trying to get us to see things, to bring things to the fore that we're really concerned about, that we don't want to see harmed, right? And in one sense, the rights, the attribution of rights it's almost like a placeholder, right? It's a placeholder for a set of relations that we find really difficult to express anymore, right? Or that we feel that the present political system and the present economic system cannot recognize. And so then that leads to this sort of legal role that rights can play, particularly in the Anglo-American system of law, right? Where rights are a way that you get your day in court. They are the ability that we, when you assert a right, it means that you essentially have to recognize that sort of independence and autonomy, right? And that's really, really important. I think with regards to the kind of concept and connection to the notion of the relationship between humans and the environment, it gets even more complex, because we're utilizing this concept of exclusion and property in order to demonstrate something that we hold dear, and that we want something that we're trying to understand the importance of the relationship with, because of its importance for us psychologically, emotionally, religiously, and spiritually. And that's kind of a real new way of thinking about rights, I think. And I'll just leave it at that for now. I don't know if I answered the question.
Just leave it at that. Just leave it dangling.
Yeah,
good. It's what I love about what you're pointing to, I think really connects with what Hermann was saying too, about the shift in worldview, the shift in perspective. It's also a shift in value. So it almost sounded like, and I'm curious what all of you as panelists think about this, it almost sounds like the rights of nature is more of a means to an end, right? It's not an end in itself, but it's a means of mending that relationship between humanity and the more than human world. Is that right? Or am I missing something? Is there something more powerful in sort of recognizing the rights of nature that's beyond the sort of relationship itself? Hermann, you have a thought on that?
No, I would like to contradict this.
Perfect. Yes, I'm wrong.
It is much, much more than a means to an end, but it is a fundamental shift, as it has also been called, a paradigm shift in the way we relate to each other and to other beings on our planet. Which means that if we actually achieve putting mankind, embed our civilization into the planet's ecosystems, and that's actually what the task is all about. Not being apart from it, exploiting it, polluting it, but being a part of it, being part of the natural cycles and not disturbing them to the extent that we see now. The climate is just the first. It's like the canary in the coal mine. And there's other global ecosystems which we are disturbing in the same way, and which will have profound repercussions on us. If we actually manage that, this is the end. It's not a means to an end. But I may have, when I phrase it in a way, I realize that it also looks like a means, because it makes people think and it makes people realize that there's something, but while thinking about it, it already changes people's mind. But that's the beauty about the law. It has not only kind of moral implications or political, it has very precise legal implications. It can be enforced. And that, I think, makes it to a very, very powerful instrument and regulatory instrument also in our relationship with this planet.
I think that's helpful, so that just because it serves a function doesn't mean that it's simply a means, that it doesn't have some sort of value or end in itself. And Joe, you wanted to pick up on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Hermann is making a really good point there, right? In some ways, I mean, when, at least in American law, you know, when the concept of essentially the rights for natural objects was first kind of put forward by Chris Stone in the 1970s, it was a means to an end. It was a means, right? He pursued this as a strategy to help particularly certain environmental groups get their day in court, ultimately to argue for specific entities, whether it was Mineral King Valley in California, or say various endangered species. But what happened was kind of like what Hermann is talking about, is it fundamentally changes the conversation. And in the case of US law, it fundamentally changed the basis for standing to get your day in court. And so now we have, you know, we have cases where natural objects are the plaintiff, right? They have guardians that are arguing for them, right? But the northern spotted owl, the northern spotted owl, the marbled murrelet, the Hawaiian palila, rivers, that they all become the plaintiff themselves, right? And it fundamentally changes that dialogue that takes place.
I love that. Yeah.
And Stone kind of talks about this. It starts to stick, right? The language starts to stick. That the law can be transformative over time.
Yeah. So the transformative power of law, I think, is really an interesting concept. Something you said earlier, Joe, about the notion of sort of separation when we have this sort of property mindset. And it also seems that connected to this sort of fundamental perspective on property is also a perspective about ownership, right? Like, for whom does this property, this land, this nature, these quote unquote resources, like, to whom does it belong? Of course, we humans. Okay, which humans? But Mona, I'm wondering if you can say a little bit about what your perspective is on this, and on the notion of ownership and belonging in the sort of human nature relationship, because I expect that you'll have something quite different to say than that sort of capitalist modern paradigm. We got you muted again, sorry.
Okay, I always forget. Okay, so yeah, it's like, you know, we exist as Indigenous people, we exist on this continuum. We exist in our traditions, our cultural lifeways. And then the other end of the continuum is current civil society and their values and their laws. And the laws we go by are the universal law, or maybe what's called natural law. And according to the natural law, we follow what's called the original instructions, which is our instructions about how we relate to Mother Earth, how we are to care for her. And that's our law. And on the other hand, Western laws are litigated, so to speak, not only by the courts, but the governmental systems. Nation states establish their laws, and in those laws, in regard to our Indigenous people, we are faced with many challenges in regard to how we are going to continue to uphold our, what we call our sacred original instructions, and the laws of the original instructions. And when we're dealing with the issue of that's being discussed about the rights of nature, And so there are certain things that have occurred in regard to indigenous people. As far as the United States is concerned, in the U.S. Constitution, it establishes the relationship with the tribes, and part of that relationship establishes that only the United States government can enter into any kind of treaties, and the laws of the United States would apply to the existing tribes. And so the treaties and those laws between the United States and the tribes is called, it's the law of the land. And so so we're, the indigenous people are navigating those kinds of situations in regard to these laws that are related to, establishing the rights of nature. Some First Nations have, what they've done is, and others have, and I've worked with some of them on drafting these. Their declarations, or their rights, their statement of their declaration on water. And in that declaration, they establish their understanding, their laws in relation to the natural laws in regard to the water, the land, all of what are called resources, the natural resources. And so this is how indigenous nations have been establishing, their own laws within their tribal lands and territories. I'm not sure if that answers it.
That says plenty. That's yeah, always. Yeah. My questions are, whatever you have to say is valuable. But what I mean, what I'm hearing, Mona, is this. It's a shift in not thinking that the land belongs to us, but a sense that perhaps we belong to the land in a way that is more intertwined, right? I mean, it's this mutual interdependence, kind of the relationships perspective that Joe was talking about.
Right.
And, yeah.
Can I say a little bit here?
Please, yeah.
Because so for me, I have a supai. I am from the people of the blue-green water, from down in the bottom of the Grand Canyon. So when we introduce ourselves, we introduce our relationship with our water or the land that we come from, because that's our connection with not only the water and the land, but also our ancestry. Acknowledging that. So that's I always encourage everybody to identify themselves with the water they come from, just like Hermann just mentioned the Rhine River. I've seen it. I've seen that beautiful land there. It's beautiful, I think. But yeah, if we start to make that kind of sense of identity of where we come from, even where you were born, and there's water there. What kind of water? What water was it? And to give yourself that sort of connection to the water you come from. So that's something I try to pass on to people, and regardless of whether where your origins are, your culture of origin, regardless of that. It's good to make that connection.
Yeah, we are always in a place, right? And so our relationship to place seems like it should be tied into who we are. Melissa, I saw you nodding your head to all of this, and I'm curious, you want to get in on this?
Yes, and let me begin by saying that I come from the lands of the Triple Continental Divide, where 3 rivers are born, the Ohio, or the Allegheny, as settlers call it, the Genesee, and the Pine. So thank you, Mona, for that inspiration. And previously, I think I was nodding because when we were talking about the rights of nature being a means to something or an end, you know, I think, and not just, you know, not just indigenous or native culture peoples, but also all of our ancestors at one time were very connected to the land, and we held those relationships just by virtue of necessity, if nothing else. And over time, as civilization has grown into something disconnected from the rest of nature, this movement is about restoring that balance and restoring that relationship. So I think that's why I was nodding earlier. But.
Those are great reasons to nod. Okay, so this legal structures, it seems to me, are also tied to sort of political and social structures, right? So it's, I guess because of this, I'm thinking one of the challenges, and I was picking up a little bit on this as Mona was talking about the challenge of certain voices not actually being recognized in a legal system. Seems one of the challenges when we face, when it comes to like environmental law generally, or even rights of nature specifically, is that when legal systems are designed around political boundaries rather than natural ones, if a forest extends beyond a particular political boundary, who's making decisions about the forest as a collective, right? Who's making decisions about the air that transcends over boundaries? I mean, does this make sense what I'm trying to, and it's not formulating a very clear question, but I'm just wondering how we overcome this challenge, right? The sort of divide between what sometimes seems like arbitrary legal and political borders, and then the sort of bioregional, geographical, natural borders, which are much more comprehensive and fluid. Anybody want to help me with this? I'm looking for genuine advice on how to proceed.
I just want to say that, that's one of the things that in the work with the Indigenous World Forum on Water and Peace, when I've met with some of the indigenous people in Brazil, that was what we talked about. We talked about, the watershed from the ridge of the mountains all the way to the reef. We must consider that. The other thing is that we, of course, indigenous people didn't have these kind of artificial boundaries that have been established in separating us by nation states. And so much of our understanding is based on the watershed from the ridge to the reef, and understanding that as the water makes its way down, that there are people who live along the way that also have to consider their responsibility to assure that that water is going to also make its way through other communities, other life forms, and arrive into the oceans in a healthy way.
Right.
And so so these are some of the things that we consider, and we've talked about that it's important to look at the watershed system.
But what do we do if the people downriver decide to, recognize the rights of nature, but the people upriver don't? I mean, how do we overcome? I mean, Herman, do you have thoughts on this as somebody who's working in sort of international law across these sort of political divides?
Yes. Actually, the question is already, I mean, if we talk about rights of nature, who is the bearer of those rights? And is it individual animals? Is it species? Is it the climate system as such? Is it the Earth's biosphere as such? I mean, lawyers like clarity, and they have difficulties grappling with this. From what I have read so far and the thinking that I have done on this, I think that ecosystems appear to be the best bearer of those rights. And that corresponds very well with what Mona said, because these kinds of ecosystems, nothing else but, I mean, river basins, for example, which form ecosystems and which are kind of identifiable. It also means that not every, I mean, do we have to apologize to every little creature that we destroy while we are walking? You know that Buddhists, some monks tend to apologize in advance for every step they are doing, because I mean, they are so mindful about that they must hurt creatures, other creatures, if they only walk. If we assign ecosystems the rights of staying undisturbed, for example, of functioning, and that its parts are being preserved, I think that's one way of overcoming kind of barriers as regards who might be able to bear those rights. And they are also, they can be identified with. Like you said, Mona, before, I mean, that's where you come from, and that's where you connect with, and that's where the spirits are. And that's why I think this concept of giving ecosystems rights, and then maybe, as I wrote in the chat, there are different ways of, I mean, who can represent those ecosystems? In Europe, we have this Aarhus Convention, that's an international convention that gives the rights to environmental organizations to sue governments if kind of environmental pollution occurs. There are other examples in Latin American countries where there are special guardians appointed, which represent this ecosystem and can claim, actually. And what for me is a very important aspect of giving rights to nature is what I alluded to at the beginning. It's the kind of reversal of the burden of proof. At the moment, every kind of preservation and every protection measure has to be justified. If you give the rights to ecosystems as such, then every intervention in this ecosystem does need a kind of justification, and must be proven that this is not interfering with the ecosystem. And that could be a massive paradigm shift again, because there would be sweeping, actually, and it would provide nature, the environment, other beings on this planet with the protection they deserve.
Oh, that's fantastic. I love that vision. It's exciting to me. But I want to play devil's advocate for a bit, because we've got a lot of good things coming in the comments, so keep those conversations going in the chat. But Joe, are we kidding ourselves? Is this even realistic, assigning the rights to nature? You know, like, I mean, you're somebody who deals in forest management and federal forest policy. Like, I mean, what does this mean to the timber industry? Does paper become a thing of the past because chopping down a tree is basically murder? Like, is this even realistic? What are we talking about here? What do you say to me as a naysayer?
Oh, well, okay. I think that's a good question. I'd like to back up just for a second to kind of
fair enough. Yeah.
Piggyback a little bit on what Hermann was saying there, right? And hopefully we'll get to your question. That I'm always amazed at how kind of brittle and inflexible our political, economic, and social systems are. And then we look to the natural systems and we see that they are adaptive, flexible, and evolutionary, right? And this is part of what I'm really interested in, is how we can learn from natural systems to kind of reshape our social systems. And we do see some evidence of this over time. I mean, even in a brittle system like in North American or specifically US domestic environmental law and natural resources law. So for instance, thinking about transboundary water issues. We've heard a lot here about water, et cetera, right? Back in the 1850s, there was actually a proposal to look at trying to find ways to make political boundaries match watershed boundaries, right? It was way ahead of its time, right? But now, in many ways, we are actually already starting to recognize the sort of watershed boundaries, and we're governing from the basis of watersheds, despite maybe those watersheds spanning either state boundaries or county boundaries, however, even international boundaries here in North America. We're starting to understand that. We're learning from the natural systems that we have to respond to. To get a little bit more to your specific question there about, are we kidding ourselves? Does it fundamentally transform the way that we think about our economic systems? If that's kidding ourselves, maybe so, right? We need to fundamentally rethink our economic systems. We need to rethink our priorities. I think the rights of nature dialogue can help us. It doesn't get us everywhere that we want to go, right? Because going back to Mona's first point in this dialogue, it's about the relationships and understanding that value comes from the relationships themselves. We tend to think of things being discrete entities, right? And we value those discrete entities because that's essentially the way that we've been taught. When the value, at least in my mind, is more in the relationship between those two, right? But the rights of nature dialogue can get us at least to see something that we haven't seen before, right? That means that we can start to value it. I mean, the timber industry is going to continue to exist. It's what I'm engaged in, right? Forest management, I take very seriously. But what we're seeing is a shift in the way that we think about the values of forests. It's not just simply the standing wood, right? It's the other processes that the forests represent. It's the nutrient cycling, it's the water storage, it's the carbon sequestration, right? And we're finding the value, right? The resilience within those systems and how important that they are even for our own individual and collective well-being. So I'll stop there, but I think it's a slow arc, right? It's a slow process. And we need, and it's a dialogic, antagonistic process, but we're getting there, I think, slowly.
You know, I think a lot of people listening in right now, it can be overwhelming when we're talking about, the entire planetary ecosystem, shifting legal structures globally. It's like, okay, well, what can I do, right? As an individual at a local community level. And I'm curious, as we approach the end of this hour, what advice do you have for those at home wanting to contribute and make a difference, even though they're not lawyers, even though they're not, presidents of nations? What advice do you have for how they can make a difference? And sort of built into that question, what gives you hope in the midst of the complexities and the challenges that we've talked about? What gives you hope that there is a way forward?
I'd like to start, if that's okay.
Please.
Sure, thank you. And I'm going to piggyback on the are we kidding ourselves thing. We are absolutely kidding ourselves if we think we can move forward in the manner that we are now and survive. So we are kidding ourselves in that regard. And, Joe is right. We absolutely must fundamentally change our economic system, our social system to maybe mimic, to be more like nature and to adhere to those universal laws that Mona was talking about. We simply can't live outside the boundaries of those laws because that's just how life works, right? And so for those of us who are either in this work or are looking to get into this work, and for anybody, this is, you're right, very overwhelming. And I really appreciate, Andrew, you know, kind of drilling us down to the very practical aspects. What do we actually do? How do we get to from a society where nature is property to one where we are nature once again, right? There are so many things that we can do. All right. One, I made a film called Invisible Hand. At the very basic level, just talking about rights of nature and thinking about these concepts and talking about these concepts to other people. We're not going to get there unless people are aware of it, right? And so sharing films like Invisible Hand or other films, there are many, many great films out right now on the indigenous rights movements, which also are inherently about this, right? One is called The Condor and the Eagle. So get together, share information, talk about it. The other thing I want to advocate for anyone who works within the environmental movement, so the traditional green movement, y'all aren't talking about this very much. You're still stuck in the hamster wheel of, you know, chewing away at the policies around the edges of the problem. We need to do fundamental change. I saw that Hermann said in one of the comments in the chat, he mentioned constitutional change. We have a lot of rights of nature work being done at the tribal and local community level, but that needs to trickle up into state constitutions, federal constitutions. That must happen. Okay, and the environmental organizations as a whole really need to pick up on that fundamental level of change that is this level of work. So if you're in the environmental movement, please share this with your colleagues. And I think I'll stop there and let other people talk.
Others. Mona, we keep muting you. I'm so sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to mention that in 2011, the Cochabamba, the Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth that was drafted at the Cochabamba Accord in Cochabamba, Bolivia, of the indigenous people. It was presented to the United Nations. I believe it was in May of 2011. It is it is on the desk. It was delivered, and it took over 20 years for them to adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And so we're not surprised there hasn't been any movement on it, but it's there. And so that's one action that has been done. And I agree with, is it not Megan? The filmmaker, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
Melissa, yeah.
Melissa, about awareness. About awareness, I also believe in peacemaking, in that where if we come to the table with, starting of course locally, and begin to create that awareness in a peaceful manner, then it's possible that we could get more support and understanding, and the recognition that it's not us versus them. It's all of us that are in this, as one of the grandmothers would say, this leaky canoe together. And it's up to us to step forward and join in the effort to preserve and protect Mother Earth.
Beautiful. Well, I want to give a chance for all of our panelists to give sort of a final thought before we move into our breakout groups to continue the discussion, and give a chance for our audience to engage more fully. in a constructive dialogue. So panelist?
Shall I start, Joe?
Go ahead.
Well, I think there's not much to add, really, Mona. I think you've put it very nicely, and that's a good conclusion. If I may say, if I may also support Melissa, I mean, use the connections that you had, use the contacts. If you're in an environmental movement, do it there, otherwise join. I mean, they are the guardians at the moment, and they are the strongest force, and may also be able to bring about political change that we definitely need. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just, both what Mona and Melissa said is, for me, it's about collective action. And we've tended in the 21st century to outsource a lot of our collective action through NGOs. What we need are citizens and communities that know the laws and know how the regulations are made, and know those citizen supervisions, and know the public comments, and know how to act on those. There's nothing more terrifying to those that are in power than citizens that know how to be active, right? So I'll leave it at that.
Fantastic. Mona, Melissa, anything else you'd like to add? Okay. Well, I do want to give a special thank you to our panelists for this wonderful conversation. I think you've all laid a beautiful foundation for what comes next. So we're going to keep this momentum going as we enter into our small group discussions. So we're going to use the Zoom breakout feature. You'll automatically be split up into small groups to continue this conversation and explore how you can take what you're learning and what you've learned here and apply it in your own context. So what I do ask is that every group assign a note taker or have somebody volunteer to be a note taker. And then if you can send your notes to info@ecociv.org, we will add that email address into the chat as well. What we'll do is we'll collect and then synthesize all of these notes and turn them into a community statement on rights of nature in a well-being society. Also, I want to add that if you've enjoyed this dialogue and you want more, right? This is just the beginning. I really do encourage you to attend our upcoming International Forum on Ecological Civilization at the end of May. Details for that can be found at ClaremontEcoforum.org. I've also added that to the chat. Fantastic. Megan, are we ready for breakouts?
I think we are.
All right.
Awesome.
Let's
Thank
pull
you,
the trigger.
everyone, and to the panelists. Thank you for joining. If you can't stay, you're definitely welcome to leave, because I know you're all busy people. And I just want to make an apology to Melissa. I am sorry that I did not have you on the screen in the beginning.
No worries, no worries.
So thank you all so much again. It was a beautiful conversation.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right. 1, 2, 3 breakouts.